Cavin Elizabeth and I'm a wedding photographer in San Diego. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the most common issues I see with flowers that are very obvious in your photos. So these are things to keep in mind when planning out what kinds of photos you want of your flowers or just the flower types themselves. What season you're getting married in really affects what flowers you have. So I'm just going to be talking about the things that I notice as a photographer that are problems with flowers that will show up on camera. And of course, you're spending money on these flowers, you want them to look the best that they can. So hopefully this video will help you to think about some of the things so that you make sure that you have the best possible photos of your flowers. The first one that I see is when florists use flowers that are really heat sensitive, like hydrangeas. I once had a wedding inland in San Diego and it was in July, so it was really hot, and the bride had mostly hydrangeas. And what happened was, before the ceremony even started, all of her centerpieces and her bouquet already looked quite withered and dead. And that was really sad. So I really couldn't get many photos of her flowers. I had to try to choose the best angles of the flowers to not show how dead they were. I mean, by the time the ceremony ended, these flowers just looked so bad and it was really sad. And so if you were thinking about hydrangeas, do not do this outdoors in the summer in a place that is hot. So just be aware of these things. I'm really not sure why that florist agreed to do that. Most florists who are experienced are not going to want to give you a product that is not going to survive the day. Now, of course, if you have a heat wave wedding and it's 100 degrees out, really any flower in that situation is not going to fare well. So just be aware of that. Maybe you can arrange for your photographer to take the detail shots earlier in the day. That's a great solution. Or the florist can keep those flowers in shade or indoors until it's time to take them outside. So just be aware that heat sensitive flowers or flowers in strong heat are not going to look good on camera, and they're not going to look good later in the day in person. Just something to be aware of. If you love photos of flowers, you probably don't love photos of dead flowers. Now, another thing that I see often, and this is something that's more on the florist than on a choice that the bride might make, are gaping holes in floral arrangements that are not meant to be there. Now, hopefully you have a photographer like me who, if they see that, and I always see that, I will twist the arrangement, because if I have an angle I want, I will turn the flowers to fit that angle and make sure I'm not shooting any holes. I know the florists appreciate that. Sometimes there's just a little gap in one of the centerpieces, but that's something that I see that shows up. Now, if you are trying to get a lot of really large, tight, ball-shaped arrangements, just know that you are going to have to spend more money filling in all of the gaps that could be there. If you want it really nice and full, then that is going to cost you a lot of money, or you're going to have to supplement with lower cost flowers. But just make sure that you are having a discussion with your florist, telling them the look you want. But I, again, hope that you have a photographer who, if they see a hole in the arrangement that's not supposed to be there, that they rotate it or they change their angle to make sure that they get the best shot of your flowers. One of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to bouquets are insanely long stems. Now, there is definitely a style of bouquet that a lot of florists who specialize in a more wild, kind of hand-gathered look will have longer stems, but typically in those designs, they make sense. They're not distracting, they're part of it. You can tell it's supposed to be that way, but I see so many bouquets that have stems that look like they were never cut, and they are so long. So in the photos of those, all I see are stems, and there's just really no way around it from the photographer's point of view. So definitely, if you get flowers on the wedding day that have really long stems, like I'm talking like the stems are maybe this long on your arrangement, and they're all green and you've got beautiful flowers on top, those stems are going to be distracting from your flowers. I have a lot of florist friends who 100% agree with this, and that's why they trim their stems fairly short. It's still comfortable enough to hold, but it's not distracting, because the stems are not important. The stems are not what's being photographed. It's the flowers on top. So if I have a bouquet with really long stems and it's really bad looking, I might trim them just a little bit, because that shouldn't be there. And typically the bride will even notice and comment on it, and the florist is already gone. But it's something that could be really awkward, especially if they are supposed to be sticking their bouquets in jars or vases later. And if the stems are too long and they weren't sized appropriately for the vase, they might stick really high on top and it's gonna look super awkward. So just make sure that you do not have tree trunk stems from your bouquet. Now, if you're in the process of hiring a florist, if a lot of their portfolio or Instagram images show super long distracting stems, either don't hire them or ask if they can cut your stems a little bit shorter. That's really not a big deal when I've been talking to florists that I know. That's not really part of the design in those contexts. So asking them to go shorter is not like asking them to change their style. It's just sort of like a small thing that if you just trim off even an inch sometimes, it makes a huge difference. And then it really makes your flowers, which are the things that you actually paid for, not the stems, really shine. One thing that I'll notice, which isn't really a huge deal because sometimes it can be moved, is having a centerpiece in front of the bride and groom where they're sitting at the reception table that kind of blocks their faces. So if I'm shooting toast or some sort of thing where I'm focusing on the couple sitting at their table, I will usually have to move that flower arrangement out of the way to show their faces. Sometimes though, it's too heavy to get to, or maybe they have a round table and I can't really reach in and get that arrangement out of there without causing a lot of trouble. So that can be problematic, and it just makes it sometimes awkward depending on your layout for us to actually get a really great view of your faces, which is really important in toast reactions, or perhaps your significant other is giving a speech and we want to see your face and their face. So it's just something to be aware of. If you're planning on having a massive arrangement right in front of your faces, maybe reconsider or maybe kind of stick it to the side. Just do something so that it can either be moved out of the way for toast or it's not going to block your faces for toast. This happens quite often and it's something that I am constantly having to move or deal with or just fix, or maybe even have the couple go somewhere else for toast. Now, the last thing I'll say is a little bit more stylistic and a little bit more subjective, but sometimes I find that if the flowers, especially the bouquet is the one floral arrangement that's going to be photographed the most because you're carrying it. So definitely think the most about your bouquet, make it really special, do something you're excited about. But I would say make sure that your bouquet suits the style of your gown. If you have a really, really classic traditional gown, it might look a little bit funny if you have this super wild flower arrangement. So I, again, think that this is something that's subjective. You might like that, but if you're looking for things to be a little bit more cohesive and just to blend better, I would recommend taking a photo of your dress and sending it to your florist and having them kind of visualize what's going to suit your gown best. Because depending on what your gown looks like, what the textures are like, if you have color in your gown, that might really affect the way that they design your bouquet for the better. So that's something I recommend, is showing them what it looks like. Same with giving them a photo of your bridesmaids' dresses. You want to make sure that everything looks cohesive and it makes sense. Otherwise, it can be distracting. That's not to say if you want to do something that really doesn't fit and that's what makes you happy, do it, go for it. But if you care about having a really refined look where everything is very cohesive, it all is very complementary to each other, then this is something just to be aware of so that you have a gown that suits your bouquet and vice versa. So it's not distracting. It's not looking like it came from two different styled weddings. That's just something that I find is helpful. Usually the weddings I shoot, the bouquet suits the gown perfectly. It makes sense, but I have seen cases where it just doesn't. So that's something to be aware of. Also, if you are having your stems wrapped with ribbon, which is personally not something that I love. I don't think it's very contemporary and modern. I think it would be better to go with a shorter green stem that you're going to cover with your hands. But if you are wrapping the bouquet with a ribbon, make sure that ribbon also complements your dress and your flowers, and that it's not too much of a stark contrast between the flowers themselves and the color and style of ribbon. So that's another thing that I have seen where the ribbon on the stems is very distracting. That's very different than cascading flowing ribbons. I think those are beautiful all the time. But again, it needs to make sense with your gown. But again, just think of everything that goes into your bouquet. Make sure that it is something that is going to be complementing your gown and complementing your hair and your general style. So those are just the top things that I notice with flowers that can be a little bit distracting in photos. I hope this is kind of helpful for you guys going into your florist meetings or thinking about your final mock-ups, whatever it may be. I personally love to have things that fit really nice nicely all together, that look like they belong, they make sense, nothing stands out as being really starkly different and out of place. Again, if you want something like that, that's great. Do whatever you want, it's your wedding, but if this is something that's important to you, these tips will really help you. See you guys next time. Bye!